quite unusual for a conflict that isn't usually in the news to get attention and to be in the headlines. And that's the case with the insurgency going on in Mozambique right now. What I mean by that is, at any one time, there are a lot of so-called low-level conflicts around the world. So these are not major wars with large-scale casualties. They tend to be lower-level conflicts that are either long-running or they are kind of at a protracted stage, as opposed to full-scale conflicts like the war in Syria or the war in Yemen. Um, but what's happening in Mozambique is now getting more attention, and one could be cynical about this and say it's only because outsiders are starting to get involved. Apparently, a South African man was killed. I don't know if he was a soldier or what his background was, but it's now starting to get more attention. But actually, this conflict's been going on for about 2 or 3 years now. Another example is the Anglophone crisis in Cameroon. That's also cost hundreds, if not thousands, of lives. It's a conflict over linguistics between the Francophone and Anglophone factions in Cameroon. Um, One big thing here, which is where I'd be understanding of press coverage, is there are parts of the world where it really is difficult for journalists to access. Um, that's true of the Tigray War in Ethiopia, which is a horrendous conflict. It's been thousands of lives. So that access to reporters is a big factor in why certain conflicts get more attention than others. It's not always a case of people just don't care about certain conflicts. Access to reporters is a big issue, and I think an under spoken about issue. But what I want to talk about here is how this is just a reminder of the face of Pan-Islamism around the world. Because what's happening in Cabo Delgado, that's the province of Mozambique, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, where this is going on, it seems to be the latest kind of battleground of ISIS, or at least ISIS affiliates. Um, and the savagery is staggering. You know, these monsters are beheading children. Let that sink in. I mean, beheading anyone is barbaric, but to behead children truly takes an evil, evil mind. Some say that evil doesn't exist. I disagree. I strongly disagree. I think there is evil in this world, and I think that's a good example of it. Um, but on the broader spectrum, I mean, it looks like the situation in Mozambique is going to escalate. Whether that will mean outside intervention or what, I don't know. Mozambique, of course, is a country that came through a very brutal civil war from 1975 to 1992, and it took a long time to rebuild from that, still is. Like many former war zones, there were lots of landmines and so on left over. Famously in Mozambique, there was furniture made from guns left over from the conflict. Or rather, I think it was an artistic project to show the price of war. It's something I remember, although I don't remember the details of it, the artists and so on, but it was very poignant. And now it looks like this Islamist group is trying to bring back war to Mozambique. It's a sad situation, but it's worse than that. It's depraved. It's just I won't even try understanding the Islamist mindset that thinks that it's Allah's will to behead a child. It's so alien and so inhumane. I think it is difficult for a normal person to rationalize. But I do think it's a reminder of the cancer of Pan-Islamism around the world. Also in the news, a church was attacked in Indonesia in the city of Makassar. And there were no deaths, but 14 people were injured in this bomb attack. Um, in Bangladesh, Islamists rioted against the visit of Narendra Modi. All over the world, wherever you get political Islam, you get problems. This is irrefutable. Wherever you get political Islam, you either get jihadist violence or you get severe human rights abuse under Islamic theocracy. Now, I don't believe that it's possible for one country or maybe even the UN as a whole, deeply flawed organization as it is, to to ever stop violence. But I think that what we have to do in Western societies, what we have to do in secular liberal democracies, is be honest. Be honest. Now, the events of the last few weeks, these demands of hardline Muslims to punish the teacher in Batley, or to expel the teacher in Batley, well, it is punishment, really, because he'd be losing his livelihood. But it's worse than that, his life has been threatened. Um, it should be a wake up call, it really should. A wake up call to show that there is a faction of British Muslims who would like this country to be a theocracy. And I am so drained and tired of the regressive left and the cowardice on this subject. An example of this is the fact that the Labour Party, and I checked out their Facebook page to make sure I just wasn't shooting from the hip and, I could see something to go on because I wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt. I thought, okay, well, maybe Starmer said something. No, I looked at their page, I scrolled back days, not a single statement, not a single statement condemning the intimidation, condemning the threats, condemning the rules being broken, if nothing else. I think that is reprehensible, and I will not forget that when it comes to voting. Um, I just think that the way that the left appease Islamic fundamentalism is pathetic. I've always said, religious hardliners are what they are. They're not really the problem because you can see it. They're very honest. They might be very perverse in their logic. They might be very loud and vocal, but they're honest in what they believe. The real problem is the appeasers. And what infuriates me about this is when people speak out, they're immediately accused of pandering to the far right. Now, I have never ever aligned with far right groups. I've never aligned myself, and I never would, with neo Nazis or white supremacists or anything like that. But we have a very serious problem here. And when you get community leaders saying that depictions of the Prophet are terrorism in Islam, but they don't have the same logic to children being beheaded in Mozambique, sure, they'll condemn it, but they're not as bothered by it. What they'll do is they'll say, well, that's awful, we condemn terrorism, but it's got nothing to do with Islam. So, I say they're honest, but what I really should say is the most hardline ones are. The most hardline Islamists will openly say they think blasphemers should be put to death and that unbelievers will be punished, and it's up to Allah. But actually, you also get those who they'll condemn terrorism. They might even condemn theocracy in some of its forms, but they will also simultaneously deny that those things have anything to do with Islam. We need to tackle that dishonesty. We need to stop allowing this propaganda that Islamist extremism has nothing to do with Islam. It's just a lie. That's like saying the Crusades of the Middle Ages had nothing to do with Christianity. Of course they did, because it was European kings believing they were acting, and popes as well believing they were acting on God's will to invade the Holy Land. And in those centuries, there was a lot of. It wasn't all one-sided, of course. You're not going to convince me that the Islamic conquests were peaceful. For example, of the Iberian Peninsula. But I really, really think that there has to be honesty about this. And I have zero respect for the moral cowards who will not be honest. I just think that they are insulting the victims. It took a while, but even Even some left wing newspapers started using the term Islamist. They accepted that it was a real phenomenon. It wasn't just something made up by right wingers. Um, I can't even begin to process the mind of someone who would think that they will be rewarded for, well, I know what the logic is. If they kill infidels, they get rewarded for it, but it's um, it's an evil death cult, that sort of pan-Islamist extremism. And I think that you can't negotiate with it. I do believe that the only answer to Islamic extremism is to confront it. I don't believe you can negotiate with it, or rather, if you do negotiate with it, it means giving them what they want. That's why the situation in Afghanistan is so difficult, because a peace deal would mean giving the Taliban significant power, which would mean the Afghan women get enslaved. Now, there's a strong argument to be made. Why is it the responsibility of the West? You know, a lot of our soldiers have died. They've been maimed in this longest running of wars. So there is an argument to be made there. But I think that any power sharing in Afghanistan would have to come with the Taliban being treaty bound to not instill that sort of dogma that they did before. And of course, sounds incredibly naive. Why would they? They'd just break their pledge or just as soon as they get into power. So it's a very, very difficult situation. But I think there's limits on what can be done. But I think that within societies that are not Islamic theocracies, we have to be honest and we have to condemn these bullies. We have to say to hardline Muslims, this is Britain, this is France, this is wherever it might be. We are not an Islamic theocracy. And they either accept that or they get the hell out. We are so hung up on political correctness and not wanting to offend people and pathetic, hardly, gutless appeasement. It's just tragic. I mean, those on the left who pretend to care about human rights, why are they silent about Islamic extremism? And I want to be clear here, I'm not talking about everyone on the left. I know people who are pretty well to the left. You know, they can't stand Boris Johnson. They tick all the boxes of left wing thought, but at least they understand that Islamic extremism is real. But there are others who don't, and it's it's dangerous because if you cannot be honest about a problem, how on earth do you tackle it? The onus is not on our society to give them what they want. The onus is on them to accept the limits of our society. Free speech, for example, doesn't allow you to have mob-like behavior. Doesn't allow anyone to have mob-like behavior. Free speech doesn't allow you to demand that the education curriculum pander to Islamic theocracy. Um, Teachers have to have the flexibility to discuss controversial subjects like blasphemy. Now, if super sensitive Muslims are going to take every single aspect of that as blasphemous, then how on earth are those teachers meant to do their job? Okay, so we just leave it out of the curriculum. Well, then what? How do non-Muslims have guidance on not committing blasphemy? Take, for example, the image of the Prophet. Now, to most non-Muslims, it's hard to fathom why that is such an infuriating thing. I wouldn't do it. I come from a teaching background. I wouldn't do it because I wouldn't want the threats that follow. But the question has to be asked, why is that seen as a more grave offence to many Muslims than extremist violence done in the name of Islam? And I know it gets into, I've heard the explanation that it's about idolatry. Okay, so you see it as inappropriate. But for people to describe it as bad as terrorism, if that's where Islam is in its thought process, depiction of the Prophet is as bad as terrorism. I can't get my head around that. But there just has to be honesty. And Pan-Islamism is a virus wherever it is. Um, it threatens women, it threatens LGBT people, it threatens Jews, it threatens non-Muslims, it threatens everyone. It even threatens Muslims because reformist Muslims, Muslim minorities, they would all fall foul of this Islamist mindset. So it really, really is a cancer on humanity, and it needs to be taken seriously.